we? CCLA difference what? Difference makers, greatness clap. Hey, greatness clap. You're the difference makers and it don't stop.
Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to do a quick sound check. Is this okay with you for you all? Marisela, we're good over there. Okay, amazing. I heard so much clapping coming out of this space right before, so I'm hoping I can follow Ana and Vero's and Marisela's just their trajectory of having some really great learning together. So welcome, everybody. Just to orient you, we are doing the Decoding the Evidence. We're really focusing on foundational skills today. So that's preschool through third grade. And I was having a wonderful conversation here with Rafael, who primarily focuses on math. But we know that when our kids can't access math, sometimes it's because they can't read the word problems that are in front of them. And that is what shuts them down before they're even able to do the math. Right. And so I think whether your focus is mathematics or your focus is, any other subject area, reading and writing is really important. And so we're going to be looking today at just preschool through third grade foundations and frameworks. We're going to be taking a look at our P3 progressions together. We're also going to be looking together at a couple of different possible assessments that you can use and leverage in your space. So I'm going to orient everybody towards the links to the handouts and the agenda. If you want to go ahead and put that in, sccoe.to, and then CCLA Decoding the Evidence, and decoding and evidence are capitalized. And I'll wait a little bit just to have everyone give me a thumbs up that you've got it. Thank you for the thumbs up. I want to make sure we're all moving together as a community. Does anybody need more time? Okay, perfect. So our session focus for today, as I mentioned, is really just around assessments. We are going to have a lot of time to collaborate, check the wisdom in the room, support each other as well. But we're going to be taking a look at assessments in early literacy. We are going to do a real quick dive into just what do we look for in early literacy. And then we're going to have some time as you have the packets in front of you. If you're someone who can, wants to look through the packets as or before I even start kind of getting to them, totally okay with you. With me, make sure that you're taking care of yourself as a learner. And so we are going to dive into taking a look at different assessments together, having some time to differentiate between them, seeing what the strengths are for each one. So here's kind of our flow for today. We're going to do a quick check into phonological awareness. We're going to look at some of the assessments that are typically used in phonological awareness. We're then going to look at decoding, talk a little bit about grouping, a little bit about high frequency words, and then we're going to do our intentional closure. And so I'll share a little bit just about my background. So my tag says math coordinator, but I actually am a learning and acceleration coordinator. I started in mathematics. I am technically the math coordinator, but prior to me coming to the Santa Clara County Office of Education, I was an instructional coach for elementary, so I did all grades. And then I also was a reading intervention teacher working with preschool through fifth grade. So I did pull out models for our older kids. I did push in models to support my teachers during their collaborative time for literacy. And then before that, I actually did high impact tutoring as well for literacy through a national nonprofit. And so managed quite a few different reading centers in our school districts here in the Bay Area. And so I've got a lot of different opportunities and backgrounds. So I'm happy to share my experiences too afterwards if folks have any more kind of personal questions you want to ask that pertain specifically to the work that you're trying to do in your district. Please feel free to ask me to stay after. I'm more than happy to have conversations. So we're going to start with just an emoji check-in. And I'm going to ask you to think about, and our virtual team is going to be thinking the same. If you were to identify an emoji that comes to mind when you think about foundational literacy data and assessment and implementing that in your school district, what emoji would you choose? And I'd like you to turn to the people around you, have a little bit of a conversation. What comes up for you, and why? And then if you are virtual, go ahead and put it in the chat. Sorry. Okay, go. Oh no. Oh. Does anybody want to share what comes up for you? Vero, go ahead. All things hearts.
Literacy intervention, all things literacy. It's my love and my gem. So it's makes me all fluffy inside.
Amazing. I think my name is also Veronica. I think I didn't mention that. And Vero and I think, have a lot in common. Anything data, anything literacy is our jam. I love having conversations with folks and districts around data and accessing it, and making it something that teachers want to use and use every day. Anybody else? What else comes up for you?
Ari with the thinking face, Stacy with the loving face with the heart, and Stephanie with the eyes as hearts.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody, our virtual team, for sharing. Appreciate it. Yes, so lots of different emotions that sometimes come up for folks. And because this mixes early literacy and data, sometimes we can have mixed feelings about this. I know that when I was working initially with one of my first schools, they really wanted to do this work, but just the idea of having to understand the progressions, pairing that with assessments, and then figuring out how often they were going to look at it together, it was definitely a kind of mind blown face, like I don't even know where to start. And so hopefully by the end of our hour together, you will know exactly where you want to start with teachers. So, our focus for our entire conference is all around learning acceleration. And with learning acceleration, we have these 5 components, right? We really are thinking about the whole child when we think about literacy and data, because our students are going to bring lots of different labels that they've already labeled themselves as. I'm not good enough at this, I can't do this. And we have to come in thinking about the whole child in order to be able to serve them through our literacy instruction, right? So we're thinking about priority content, especially important in the work we're going to talk about today. We want to make sure that we're using the right assessments so that wherever our children are on their progression of learning, we are targeting the resources, the supports that we are giving them just in time. We're not giving them things they've already experienced. We are giving them just in time so we can help them cross that bridge to the next skill level on that progression, right? So that's all the priority content in our assessments are so key for that. Using evidence-based strategies, universal design for learning, social emotional learning, and that we are really thinking about the strengths and assets our students bring, and thinking about how we ensure that our teaching is also culturally relevant. And so we're really focused on what kids can do on that progression wherever they are, and then so we can get them to that next phase. And so data is a really, really key part of improving student outcomes, right? And so here our folks, so Doug, how many of you were able to see Doug speak yesterday? I think most people, he's amazing. I love watching him. One of the things that Doug helped us put together and others was this Bridges framework. And the Bridges framework is essentially, if you were to take this framework and have conversations with staff and teachers around which of these elements, these principles that fall underneath each of these indicators, which you are doing and how well you feel you're doing on them, this will give you kind of a map forward for a school that's really focused on learning acceleration. And one of those pieces, which is kind of our focus for today, is really thinking about that data piece, right? Do we have the right assessments? Do we have the right data systems that are going to show us and help us unpack that data? How often do we look at it? One of the things I love that we put in here are student empathy interviews. Ensuring that we understand how students are feeling about our instruction and our practice is really important as well. And so we're really going to be focused, right, just on that data today. And so We are going to do a little bit of a zoom in, zoom out, because I know a lot of us have kind of varying experience with foundational literacy. I'm going to do a little bit of a fist to five. Fist to five is essentially 0. I don't really know anything about this. And 5, I'm an expert. I think I could actually give this presentation. So I want you to think about, when you think about your understanding of all of the components of early literacy instruction, how would you rate yourself? Fist to 5. A4. We've got a pretty good mix. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Maricela, how about folks in the chat? What did they say? Oh, amazing. Okay, we've got a lot of people who know a lot about this. So then I'll know, then I can kind of breeze through that part a little bit. So here are the sections we're going to be looking at together. And after each section, we're going to take a look at some assessments that are on your tables. For those who are in the virtual audience, the link that I have in the PowerPoint is going to take you to where you can access all of the handouts that we have here today. So first thing we're going to look at together is phonological awareness. And so before we kind of dive into that, though, we need to look at the simple view of reading, right? If we want to make sure that our kids can get to being great at reading comprehension, that's the ultimate goal, right? We want them to be able to be great readers. We don't want them to live just here in this world of decoding, right? Sometimes our programs can focus so much on the decoding aspect, we kind of forget about, well, we also need to give them the experience with whole books and having conversations about books. So the word reading and word meaning work together to get us to our reading comprehension. And the assessments that we choose need to be able to help us identify, do our students have all the word recognition skills? Do our students have the opportunity to create word meaning? This together is going to get us to reading comprehension, right? Sometimes folks say, what are some reading comprehension strategies? My first question is usually, tell me about what you're doing here, because this is what's going to really get us there, right? Are there reading comprehension strategies? Absolutely. There's things we can do with our students to support. But if there's not language-rich classrooms, and there isn't a strong systematic and explicit instruction for phonics, it's going to be a lot harder to get us there, right? And that's the ultimate goal. So this is Scarborough's Row. Can I get a hand raise if folks have seen this before? Yes, so we know that the tighter the more practice our students get, the more proficient our students become at reading, right? And this is our focus for today. It's really just around the word recognition piece, because we're looking at early literacy, and we want to make sure that our students are leaving second grade, going into third grade. Now we're learning not just how to read, but we're reading to learn. So we want to think about, which assessments do we have for phonological awareness? Oftentimes I feel like this is very much overlooked. We just want to jump right into phonics, but this is the foundation, not this. And then we also want to make sure that we're really thinking about how we did high frequency words. When I was teaching, I remember I used to have my students with flashcards, and I would see, and it would go through like a high frequency word test. The science of reading is really kind of gearing us into another direction and saying, our high frequency words, there are pieces of them that are actually decodable. There are elements of them that don't follow the pattern. Those are the parts our kids have to memorize, because kids shouldn't really be memorizing words, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And so I'm going to show, because I know we've got kind of a mixed audience today, just a little bit about how the brain reads, the brain research that's come out around reading, so that you can have something to kind of ground yourself as we kind of finish talking about just how the brain reads.
What do we know about the complex process of learning to read? Surprisingly, a lot. Scientific research collected over the past 4 decades reveals what happens in the brain and what must happen in the classroom to enable skillful reading. Most children learn to walk and talk naturally without a lot of support from adults, but reading is different. Reading is not hardwired in the brain. and the neural pathways involved must be developed through successful instructional experiences. Let's look at the reading brain. The parts of the brain that allow us to process sounds and recognize visual images are already in place at birth in the left hemisphere. However, the phonological assembly region is not intact at birth. This is the part of the brain that allows us to connect speech sounds with visual images, such as letters, and enables reading. And it must be built through explicit, systematic phonics instruction and practice with decoding.
And so I'm going to share with you just a graphic that one of my colleagues put together. For some reason, I don't know why it creates these other little like phantom circles, so ignore those. But this is the part that we're trying to really build, right? Our students, when they're looking at words, they're going to be able to see, okay, this word, the word is cup, C, U, and P. That's the visual processor, right? Then it moves into the speech processor. They need to correlate that with the sound, the and the p sound, whole different region of the brain. And as teachers, we are strengthening this through systematic phonics. In order to know where our kids are, we need to really understand which assessments we need to have in place. And so from there, then there's the meaning processor, right? Not cupping hands, but an actual cup I can drink out of. And so our brain is using multiple sections of our brain in order to create and be able to read. And that complexity is really important for us to be able to understand. And the first part, how many of you have worked with TK teachers? Are a TK teacher? Oh, Maricela. Oh, thanks, Maricela. I'm so sorry. You're going to have to do that because I talk a lot with my hands. I apologize to our team who's virtually. So I was discussing just a little bit about how how we are trying to strengthen this section here in the middle around phonics instruction, that our little ones are using lots of different parts of their brain to put things together. They have to visually connect and then think about, well, what sound is that? And then when I've figured out how to blend that word, what image do I have some context around that's connected to that word? So lots of complexities that are happening in the brain. And so the first thing I'm going to have us do is, in front of you, you should have a document that looks like this. How many of you have looked at the P3 progressions before? Thanks, Shanaz. Yep, Shanaz better. So P3 progressions is something I really encourage you to take a look at. If you are, I think sometimes when folks look at the TK learning foundations, it can feel like a lot, but if you just take it in pieces and see and help to help yourself and then help others see the connection between the TK progressions and our standards, this document is actually incredibly helpful, and I really encourage you guys to take a look at it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to just take a look at that initial, the top of it should say phonological and phonemic awareness. And I already went ahead and I highlighted some things for you. I'd like you to take a look at what do our little ones have to know and do at the very beginning once they start TK. How does that change over time? And I'm going to ask a couple of folks to just share. What do you notice in a little bit? What do you notice? What's happening in TK? Maybe I'll start there. What do you notice is happening in TK? Sometimes I think we can have like these really, although what's on there is rigorous, we have sort of a very academic mindset when we look at what's happening in TK. What's happening in TK?
I think they're beginning to see letters matching with sounds.
They're just noticing, right? They're just noticing letters matching with sounds. The noticing, that's where they're starting, right? What else do we notice? And I am going to, as everyone adds their information, I want to make sure that our virtual folks can hear. What else do you notice? I think one of the things that I usually notice when I look at these and is just a reminder that it would be amazing if our kindergartners entered knowing all of their sounds and all of their alphabet and they're ready to go. Is that realistic and possible? No, it's also not developmentally appropriate, right? They're just noticing their world. They've just been alive for 4 years, right? And so thinking about how important it is for our teachers to remember that, yes, there's this academic push that we have, but in order to create really strong foundations, we need to be on pace with how children develop. If we're not, if we're pushing them too hard, it's likely they're going to become frustrated, and that social emotional element is really important too. They need to see teachers as a safe space, classroom as a safe place where I can learn and grow and understand and think about my world. Right? Do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. So what I also see is that the TK and then moving into from the K through the third grade is they're learning that small parts also start to make and construct the bigger pieces, the bigger things. Not only in literacy, but also that could work with in mathematics or other subjects, if you want to call it. Like little small parts are part of a bigger picture, and that bigger picture has a story behind it too. So that's yeah.
Thank you for saying that. So we're going to look at phonological awareness assessments right now. And phonological awareness is essentially the ability to hear and work with sounds in spoken language. This is before letters even enter the picture. Phonological awareness bridges oral language and print. It is one of the strongest predictors. I'm going to say that again. It is one of the strongest predictors of later reading and spelling achievement, and I find it's often overlooked. You'll walk into classrooms sometimes and it'll be a tiny, like 5 minutes of phonological awareness, boom, let's go, right? And it's part of us trying to slow down a little bit and remember how important a language-rich classroom is to being able to do so many of the things we want them to do in later grades, right? And so I often would tell teachers when I would work with them that when you think about phonological awareness and what it is, think about you can do it with your eyes closed. And we're going to do some practice a little bit today. But pretty much when we're thinking about phonological awareness, there's these different levels. If you're a very visual person, I put in that visual. But essentially, let me kind of show you what the levels will look like. There are, let's see. I don't know what I did. Let's see. Sorry, there we go. Okay, so there are 3 levels of phonological awareness. Level 1, your kids are just learning how to rhyme. They're learning alliteration, right? How many of you remember the brown bear, what do I see, right? They're segmenting sentences, right? If I say, I like dogs, how many words does that have? Let's do it together. I like dogs. How many? 3. Then they're also segmenting compound words, right? Everybody say sunflower. Let's do the parts. Ready? Sunflower. How many parts? 2. They're also, and then they're doing syllables, right? So how many syllables are in banana? Let's do it with our fingers. Ready? Go. Ba-na-na. How many? 3. You're also doing math with this, right? Oh, I did say bananas. You're right. Then level 2 is onset and rhyme, right? I think usually when I see this in the classroom, there are like word ladders, right? So if I start with mat, at, onset, rhyme, and then teachers would think, what other words end with at? Well, I could do mat, sat, bat, hat, right? Onset, rhyme. Level 3. So notice the levels. We're not jumping right into them, right? Level 3 is actually phoneme segmentation, and you do a lot of wordplay with this. And we're going to do this in just a little bit. And with phoneme level segmentation, you're thinking about deletion, so deleting a sound completely and then asking what's the word that's left. You're substituting a sound for another one. You're blending, and you're adding. And just because a child can do one of these We cannot assume that, oh, they know how to substitute, so they must know how to do all of this. Because that's not the case, right? We need to be able to check through our assessments, can they do all of these levels? Super important. So we are going to do a little bit of practice. You are back in first grade, okay? Some of these are more kindergarten, but we're going to do these together. So segmenting sentences. Let's do I am happy. Ready? Fingers up. Ready? I am happy. I am happy. How many? 3 words. Okay. We're going to do now, let's do syllables. So let's do the syllables for California. I wouldn't do that with little ones. It's too complicated, but we're adults. Ready? California. Ready? California. How many? 4. All right. Next one. We're going to do some segmenting. So everybody say map. Let's see how many sounds we hear in the word map. Let's do fingers up. Ready? Go. App. Map. Okay. Let's do deletion. Everyone say smile. Take out the s. What do you have left? Good job. You guys are great for school. All right. Next one. Let's do changing. Let's do some substitution. So how about, let's see, say map, take out put in t. What do I have? Okay, everyone say tap. Take out t, put in h. What do I have? Good. Sometimes you want to throw in nonsense words because you want to see, can your kids do it? So, and then the last one, blending. Let's do the word past. Everybody, let's blend together. Ready? Go. That was me not modeling very well. That was my fault. Let's do another word. How about let's do cat? Everybody say cat. Good. Let's do it together. Fingers up. Ready? Go. At cat. Good job. All right. And then the last one, we're going to do an addition. So everybody say top. Add the s to the beginning of that word. What's a new word? Yeah. Can you imagine, even as adults, right? We're like, wait, what is that word? Can you imagine a little one? Now they need to be able to do that because you're really helping them pause and listen to themselves. And then that ability to pause and think about all of those sounds is not only important in the reading, but is also going to be important in the encoding, the spelling, which is so critical in anything that we do. Right? We were talking over here with Rafael about the amount of writing and reading that we have to do now in math. So what I'm going to have you do now, we looked at this together, right? We saw the trajectory that we're just naming sounds, looking at them, doing compound word. We're also looking at syllables for really, maybe one syllable words. We're thinking about once we get into kindergarten, that's when we move into like counting, rhyming, blending, segmenting syllables. We start with the onsets and the rhymes in kindergarten. So there's a progression. And we want to be able to look at our assessment. So I'm going to ask you to take out the 3 assessments that I have for you at the very, very top. So once you take out those 2 progression documents, we're going to look at the other progression document in just a bit. You should have 3 assessments. The first one is the past. It says phonological awareness screening test. There is a second one. It says Yop Singer phoneme segmentation test. Make sure you have that in front of you too. We have a rich number of resources that we can use as teachers, and I think this is where it gets confusing. And sometimes folks say, just tell me which one do I use? Well, you need to think about where are the gaps in maybe some of the curriculum that you might have? Where do you need to maybe supplement some additional content? And so that's why we're looking at these right now. And the last one is the Hegarty Phoneme Awareness Screener, and this one's for grades 2+. You'll notice it's very comprehensive. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to just compare these and look at them. Talk to your table partners about what do you notice. Do they have all of the levels of phoneme? Do they have all the phonemic awareness, phonological awareness levels in them? Some don't. One only has one. How long might you think it'll take your teachers to finish these exams for each, or assessments for each student? Right? How much time do you actually have? Maybe you only use a section of it. Look at the directions. What feels more intuitive for you, for your teachers? So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to just look through them, and then we're going to talk about them.
Go ahead and
Have some conversations in your table, and I think they're happening naturally already. What do you notice? What would work for your teachers, for you? What wouldn't, and why not? If you are virtual, go ahead and put in the chat, what do you notice? What would work for you? Why or why not?
The difference between, if we don't understand correctly, it's automatically.
Automatic for this particular assessment means that the child is able to give you the answer unless it is.
Oh, got it. So that's fine. That's good.
It's that you know that that student now has that. They've got the ability to do that, and they don't have to think about it as much. Because with this particular assessment, the administrators recommend that each child gets at least 5 seconds to answer.
Okay.
5 seconds is a lot.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. But at least it kind of gives you a sense of, are they getting it? Do they not know it at all? Are they sort of on their path? What is up?
Okay. Good. This has to be done individually. Child.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, yeah. So we're going to come back together just for the sake of time. And I know there's still lots of conversation. What is coming up for you all? What do you notice? I know I had some questions over here. We're going to answer those questions because it was a really good one around, like, what does automatic mean? I'll talk about that in a little bit. Anybody want to share what's coming up for you all?
Says, I really like Haggerty assessment. It is quite thorough and practical. I use it in my tier 2 screenings.
Beautiful. And Haggerty is used really often. I think when I get to look at what school districts are using, that is the assessment, that is the program that lots of folks are using, which is why we went ahead and put it in there. Anybody else? What else comes up for you all? Okay, that's okay. I think we're processing.
Back to the screening test for phonological awareness. When we looked at one of the things for syllable levels, we saw the word book, case, and then you have to say case. And we're like, why don't they have to say book? And so that kind of sparked some questions, but that was a good start.
Yep, and in those, right, your student's ability to be able to segment compound words initially is a good initial It's an initial, like, beginning assessment. That's likely going to happen in TK, and then you're going to move on to a little bit more complexity. But we're going to look at each one together. Oh, Shanaz, do you want to say?
I'm a big picture person, so if you think that my question will be covered later on or it's offline, I'm fine. I'm just putting flipping the lens and looking at this from student perspective. So we do have these amazing tests, and I'm lucky that my reintervention people, my peeps are here, so we are having meaningful conversations. My question is that when we have M class or any kind of literacy screener required by the state or dyslexia screener, and we all want to make sure we are not separately screening for that, and we have merged the tools. Looking at it from students' perspective, they have to be assessed on M class and then this. So how do they fit into each other?
And I'm so glad that Shanaz brought that up. So we all have our universal assessments that we now need to do, right? That gives us the indicator of the curiosity of this child. I need to look into their abilities a little bit more, right? Once you identify that, so when I was an intervention teacher, we did that too. We had a universal assessment. It was an initial flag. When I first had started, we didn't have something like that. I was really just using their blended learning, so their online learning work that they were doing. I was looking at lots of other data points to put together to help me at least get a sense of which of my students might I need to do a little bit more assessing to really dive deep into what exactly they need on that progression of learning. And so after you've done your screener, that's when you would then say, I think based off of what I see in this screener, I need to pull this particular student out just to do this quick, like 5-minute check-in. Do they have all of these levels of phonological awareness down? If it's yes, right, and as you're giving each of these documents, for those who are here in person, I only gave you like what the teacher actually sees. There's a whole like instructions for the teacher and all that I left out because it would be so much paper for me to print out. But it will give you a sense of, how do you start to move through the assessment really quickly if you're noticing the students got it. So for some of these assessments, it would sometimes take me a minute to realize like, oh, they actually have this down. Phonological awareness is good. I need to move to my phonics screeners now to check. So this is certainly not something you would do with all your kids. This is something you would do as I'm curious. I think they might have something that I need to teach around phonological awareness or phonics, and then that's when we would use the screeners we're thinking about today. Yeah. So it's really thinking about, based off of your screener that you've chosen, do you feel like it's hitting on all the things we're talking about today? It hits on all the levels of phonological awareness and all the levels of good, alphabetic principle and spelling sound correspondence on phonics. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see anything on sentence segmentation.
Yep. And I'm glad you brought that up. Yep. So sentence segmentation, I've also seen teachers, I actually haven't run into anything. Does anyone happen to have something they use that has sentence segmentation? I've honestly seen teachers just use AI to give me a couple of, I'll give some of the examples. You can even copy paste some of these examples and say, here's examples of what it would look like for phoneme segmentation. I'm working with my TKers. Can you give me just like 3 or 4 checks that I can do for sentence segmentation and compound word segmentation, right? Especially if you feel like this isn't robust enough. Sometimes you can leverage AI to help create that. Now, you want to obviously check in with your folks of curriculum and instruction to see if that's okay at first. But if you feel like you can't find something for that, I certainly haven't run into it. But if anyone virtually has run into it, please feel free to drop it in. We're also gathering all the wisdom that's in the room as well. So I want to walk through a little bit about just a little bit of just as something for you to kind of keep in mind for each of these. You can take notes on that document so that you can keep them for the future. So the first is for the phonological awareness, the past is kind of what we usually will refer to it, the phonological awareness screening test. It does provide Some folks asked around, why does it have a automatic and a correct? If you look on the right-hand side, the way that this is administered, the student either receives a 0, a 1 if it's correct, or an X if they identified that this child was able to do it automatically. And automatically just means they were able to answer in 2 seconds or less. So you're kind of counting as a teacher. Can they do it in 2 seconds or less? Is it automatic or just correct? The student gets 2 5-second attempts at each task. You want to stop the test if 3 or less are answered in that particular section. And then levels D and E are passed if all of the items are correct, because they are segmentation of larger pieces, such as our syllables. And then levels F and through M are passed if at least 4 out of the 5 are correct. Right? This is a very reduced version of what is actually in the instructions. I highly recommend folks to actually read through it if you're going to administer it. And it doesn't take very long, as you can see. It's really just going through. Usually it's about 5 minutes or so for each child that you've identified as needing that secondary. We're going to look now at the Yop-Singer phoneme segmentation test. And I heard someone over here say, this is really just segmentation. Right? That's all it has. We have lots of levels of phonological awareness. It only does 1. Something for you to keep in mind, totally might be something you want to use if you feel like other assessments that you have are already hitting on the other levels. You just need something a little bit more robust for that phoneme segmentation. You can pull parts of this to be able to just quickly assess your students. And the directions do state very explicitly that the scoring, the cutoffs have not been identified. All or mostly correct responses indicate strong phonemic awareness. So something for you to keep in mind. There's not necessarily a cutoff for the folks who created this. And the last one is the Haggerty screener. I also love, a couple of folks said here that they love the Haggerty screener. I do too, because it assesses everything. But it's also very long. It's longer, right? Shanaz, did you want to add something?
So there is a screen. I know there's a screener for TK, K, and 1, 2.
Yes, I believe there is too. Yeah. That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I can write it down. Does anyone know the answer to that question? Is the Haggerty screeners for ages TK through 1? Oh, perfect. So someone said it's still open source. Okay. And by grade level. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for adding that. So that is phonological awareness. And then, as I mentioned, you really do just want to think about, right? Because this is part of the art of teaching. There's so many resources that are given to us. It can become overwhelming, but it's really you knowing, like, what are the progressions of what my children need to know? Do I have the assessments that match that? Right? And then if the answer is no, that's when we add these other pieces. Because oftentimes, one set of curriculum is not going to have everything, right? So just, part of the art of teaching. Before we move into the decoding, does anyone have any questions before we move into that? Okay, we're going to move into decoding. So this is that second piece. When you think about Scarborough's rope, we've done the first phonological awareness. We're moving into decoding. And when we think about decoding, so now we're putting sounds to letters, so to something visual. We have the alphabetic principle, assessments for that. Spelling and sound correspondence, assessments for that. You have 3 of them that are in your packet if you want to go ahead and take those out now. You should have the BPST, the core phonics, and then there's the dibbles as well. So we're going to take a look at those together right now. And so alphabetic principle is now when our little ones are bridging speech to print. The alphabetic principle is the understanding that spoken words are made up of individual sounds and that those sounds are represented by letters or groups of letters. And so our kids are learning that letters represent sounds, that sounds can be mapped to print, and that words can be read and spelled by connecting sounds to letters. We sometimes forget. They're so little, they're just realizing, oh, this is connected to this, right? So with the alphabetic principle, that then moves into a little bit more complexity. We're now thinking about spelling sound correspondence, and our kids are learning that a sound can be spelled more than one way, that a spelling can represent different sounds. So for example, the k sound can be spelled with a C, with a K, or with a CK in English. And I'm sure, and I wish I should have, I should have put it in here, but I love all the kind of memes and things like teacher memes that come out around how complex English is, that there's so many different sounds. I think there's 44 phonemes, right? There's 44 different sounds that our kids have to learn, but there's only 26 letters. How does that happen, right? And so our kids have to build that, we're helping them explicitly build that connection, and that's why that systematic explicit phonics instruction is so key. And so here's an example. We've got a couple of our school districts in Santa Clara County that are actually using the University of Florida's open source content. And so this is their scope and sequence for their explicit systematic phonics instruction. It is free source. The PowerPoints, everything are available for teachers. And so this is what our teachers are starting to move through as they connect now that speech to print, right? So, and I'm happy I can talk so much about UFly. I really love their work too. We're going to look now, just give ourselves a little bit of thinking time to look at now the alphabetics, phonics, and decoding progressions. I've already highlighted a couple of things for you all. If you're online, there should be a link to those P3 progressions. Give yourself some time to take a look at what do our 3 to 4 year olds, our TKers, need to know about letters. Do they need to know all their letters? How many do they need to know in TK? How does that progress towards 3rd grade? And so you might have noticed that when you're working with our real littles, you're matching some letter names to their printed form, and especially the letters in their name. When I have a 3 and a 5-year-old nephew and niece, and when my sister started to talk to me about, ask me questions around like how do I help them learn, sounds and spelling and all that. The first is I taught her about phonological awareness, and then that just kind of blew her mind. And she's like, "Oh, I didn't really think about all of the talking that I need to do and helping him and her understand speech." And the different word parts and it kind of almost being metacognitive when they were reading to Lorenzo and Leia. And so when we then moved into thinking about letters, she wanted to start A, B, C, D, E in order. Because that makes sense, right? You just go in order of the alphabet, right? But we know as educators, we don't do that in the classroom, and we don't do that in the classroom because we want them to form words really quickly, which is why most programs will start with like an M and then an S and then an A and move to T and so on. Because you can create a lot of words with M, S, A, T, right? But I because they were so young, right? You want to start with something they know, and they know their name. And how proud were you, if you remember back when you were in kindergarten, when you first were able to write your name for the first time, right? So your name is part of that culturally responsive pedagogy, right? Having conversations with families about how did your child get your name, and then having them tell stories about that and doing that dictated writing so the students can talk about their name, and then also them being able to write it on their own, to draw it in the sand, to do it with clay. Right? All of that is going to be really important. So we're starting with something they know, their name, and knowing the letters of their name starts with that's an anchor. And then we move from there, right? And so let's see. Okay, so as we kind of move through this progression, right, they're not really recognizing all of the upper and lowercase letters until the end of kinder. This is just exposure, right? They're recognizing, I speak English, so my niece and nephew are also bilingual, right? And so there are letters in the Spanish alphabet that they are going to have to learn that do not exist in the English alphabet as well. And so this is just exposure, especially for our little ones that are navigating two languages, right? And that pride of understanding, oh, I'm going to have to learn this in two different languages, right? And so our next piece that we're going to take a look at now is kind of diving into the diagnostic assessments themselves. I mentioned you should go ahead and open up all of these if you're virtual, if you have them in front of you here, put them side by side. So you have the BPST, DIBELS, core phonics. These are actually really similar. Sometimes it's just a preference of how things are outlined, what the student materials look like. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to just compare, be thinking about the same thing. How intuitive does this look for you or your teachers to use? How much time might one take compared to another? What is missing in the current curriculum and assessments I have access to that I might need to supplement with parts of this or all of this? And I'm going to move through a little bit because I'm a little bit behind. So with BPST, as you can see, everything fits on one page, which is beautiful. So it already tells you a little bit about how long this is going to take. One of the things that I actually really love about this assessment is when I show it to parents, it just so cleanly gives them a sense of the progression of learning. Your kiddos are learning consonants and vowels and then digraphs, and then you're going to learn the difference between short and long vowel sounds, and then they're moving through all of this. I think for this kind of gives a real quick visual aha to some of our parents. Do you want to add something?
So at our school, we do M class, or our district, and then we also, for many years, we've been doing the reading levels, like from ORR. So I think a question that we had were, should they go hand in hand? Should we be, focusing on one and not the other?
Certain grades, certain.
Yeah, so for certain grades. Yeah. Ooh, I would need to unpack that with you. So you're using the reading levels to start off with, and then, okay. Do you want to add, Shanaz?
Sorry. We can take this offline as well, maybe if it's not everybody's concern. But one question that our team has been grappling with is that we've had some traditional assessments in place that teachers are familiar and they are expert, and they're using that to guide their instruction. Now with M class or a screener coming in, again, the same question, how much are we assessing and how much instruction time is that being taken away from our students and teachers? So we want to understand the correlation between the past assessments that we are used to giving and the new one. Is it giving us the data we need for that grade level, or we need to do the whole battery of it? So that's the larger question, and in that context, M class is not something that's going to go away, at least if it's our screener. Then particularly for K1 too, then do we need to give ORR? And if the skill sets or the data is similar, because if they have not been, I mean, I'm oversimplifying this, but if they have not, if students are not able to recognize the letters or have the phonemic awareness, then assessing them for reading comprehension, does it really make sense? Is it too premature? So those are the questions we are grappling with.
Good question. So I'm going to take us, well, okay, if we go back to the simple view of reading, right? One of the things that you want to think about, and I think this goes back to what we had shared before, right, that there's so many different assessments that are given to us, and I know the concerns about instructional time, and how informative is this? What you want to do, I think, as an educator, is to think about, what do we know about the progression of the skills my students need to have? Do I have the assessments that are going to hit on all of those? Now, if you are, so with my, I'll tell you a little bit about what I did with my 3rd through 5th graders. So with my 3rd through 5th graders, we did have, it was mostly like reading comprehension based assessments, right? Not a lot of phonics and phonemic awareness and all that. I would look at the data there to see which of my students are struggling. If my students are struggling, my question is this a language issue? Do I need to do a better job of building vocabulary and having vocabulary walls and having conversations about language? They're not understanding because they simply don't have enough context and real world experiences with some of the concepts that you have that kids are reading about. Or, right, I think we have to play detective. Much like our doctors do when we go and we go to the doctor and we tell them this is what's happening. They're going to go through their list and ask you questions and all that. We're very much doing the same thing here. We're noticing something might be going on with the student, but because we know about the simple view of reading, is this a language thing? Do I need to do some vocabulary type assessments, which those exist too, right? Or is this just a foundational skills literacy area of need for this child? Are they really struggling to blend words together? Are they struggling because they don't know their short and long vowel sounds and how to differentiate them? I did a BPST not too long ago with a little one who was in a dual immersion program before, and parents moved him. He flew through this BPST and gave me the Spanish sounds and letter names for all of them, and he was like, I did great. And it was like, you did do great. Wow, you are so skilled with your primary language. Amazing. I knew then, and the thing he was mixing up the most, because our vowels, the names, how they're named in Spanish and English, get so confusing because one, like E is the E in English, right? Like elephant. E for us is I. Right? So how confusing is that for them? So when we notice we have assessments, it's not to say like, oh, should I do all of these other assessments? It's just to use your wisdom as an educator about what the progressions are, and then just think to yourself, do I have the assessments that are going to help me diagnose what this child might need? And because you know about the simple view of reading, is it a language issue, or is it a decoding foundational skills thing? Right? Is it something I need to do and pull from these assessments to just fulfill my curiosity and figure out, might this just be this child's having difficulty with differentiating between the vowel sounds in Spanish and vowel sounds in English, right? Especially for English language learners. So there's not a tried and true answer to that. It's really just you thinking about, what do I know as an educator about these progressions? And out of all of the millions of resources that I have, do I have something that is going to help me diagnose and look at and dive a little bit deeper into each of these? So I think when you're thinking about that for yourselves as districts, I would start with, let's map out the progressions. Do all my teachers know that first? And then let's map the assessments that we have for each of these. Do we have them for all the levels of phonological awareness and decoding? Right? Then we are able to kind of move forward, and we can create a path forward. So for my district, for example, we started with, for 3rd through 5th graders, we started with the reading assessments that we traditionally did. And then we said, let's first kind of rule out phonics. So then I would do BPST. Much of the time, BPST would help me realize it's a decoding thing. I just need to do some small group intervention for 8 weeks. We're going to work on long vowel patterns for E and for I. Right? And then you move them forward and you see that they're much stronger readers. So it's very much going to be dependent on all the resources you have and the knowledge that you and your team have and can build collectively to then be able to kind of answer that question.
You also know knowledge of students.
Yeah. Yeah, I think your county offices of education are going to be your primary source there. And you probably already knew that. Session works very closely with Brittany, and Brittany's amazing. So, I'll also happy to come in and we can kind of think together, how might we be able to help you map that out for your team? And it could just be like a consultation call, just real quickly. Yeah, because there is. We're given so much, right, to look through, and I think we sometimes forget, we turn it into a science. There's an art to teaching. We got to choose our materials wisely, right? And so the other pieces that I wanted to walk you through, so with Dibbles, it is by grade level. It's a little bit more of an intensive read. There's lots to read to become familiar with how to do Dibbles, which is why usually if you just want something really quick, BPST is what I encourage folks to use. And then the core phonics survey is quite similar. So they all measure really similar things. Sometimes it just comes down to the complexity. I think with like core phonics, for example, they give you the alphabet, and it's like it's uppercase and lowercase for the student document mixed in, and it takes up almost an entire page. So you're getting this set of mixed up letters that are all uppercase and lowercase, and they're all super mixed up, versus BPST, which is just here is the letter once, and here, tell me if you know it or not. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Are some of these assessments, are they grade level based, or the assessments tell you based on the score what grade level they're at?
Both. Okay. So BPST is really just thinking about what children need to know about reading in a progression, right? When you look at, and as is core phonics, when you go back though and look at Dibbles, as you can see, it's divided by grade level, right? Both are going to give you good information. Right? You're not going to go wrong with using either one of them. It's just knowing and realizing that this one might just hone you in on third grade. And then that means you're going to have to go back. If your student doesn't pass the third grade, you're now going to have to go into second grade and first grade. So just something for you to know about how to use those tools. Marisela.
Some of the vocabulary stuff. And then Eloisa is asking, commenting, I have experience being talked away from using a BPST or other assessments of foundational skills for upper grade students to inform my tier 2. I'm encouraged to use fluency ORF test, but I don't think it gives me the same kind of information. So I do both.
Okay. Yeah, and we certainly need to ensure that we're following what our school district leaders are encouraging us to do. If you notice there is a gap and you have a wondering around that, right, and you feel that safety of being able to bring that up and say, what can I do in upper grades for decoding? I would encourage you to just have that conversation, because our upper grade students, right? I think about a little bit about my story. Both my parents are from Central Mexico. My father, in all, has 3 months of a 4th grade education. He learned how to read and write here. He was doing this stuff as an adult, right? As a 20-year-old, and so I think that no matter the grade, you're still going to need to understand our symbols for learning for reading, right? No matter what age you are. There's lots of research around how we have a lot of community members who don't know how to read and write, and they're adults, right? So they're going to be doing all of this work as well. We're not going to teach them through that whole language approach where they're memorizing words. They need to learn how to decode the system, right? So I would encourage you to think about, how can you can share these with your leaders and just say, we're really feeling like we might need something related to decoding. What could we do as a next step, just to try or to pilot, just to test something out, right? And then Marisol, I think you had another question. Oh yes, vocabulary. Can you jot down, if the person can jot down their email? I think one of my colleagues will have some vocabulary assessments that you can do. And Dr. Fisher, he has some really good stuff in one of his books. I've read so many of his, I can't tell you which one right now, but I'll also look to see if I can find which book that's pulled from. Oh, that's right. Yes. Thank you, Shanaz. Yes, Marzano also has some really good stuff too. So I wanted to just share a little bit about grouping. I think sometimes when we get to this, it's like, okay, we've done the assessment. What do we do with it now? Right? And it really is just pretty simple. You look to see where was mastery right before. That's where they are in their progression. Here's where we're moving to next, right? And I would just make piles. I would literally take my BPSTs and I would make piles. These are my little ones that need help with blends, because it's next on the progression. These are my students that are needing help with long vowels, and as you can see the difference between both of these assessments, this little one was part of the blends group, small group that I would be pulling. And then here are my students who are stuck on long vowels. Right before that, as you can see, this child here, they were able to do most of their CVC words, right? And the ones that they didn't, both had an I. So I now know as a teacher, because instead of E, the S sound, they're giving me the I sound. So now I know as a teacher, I might just need to work a little bit on this vowel. And as you can see up here, which vowel did they miss? The I, right? So I don't need to go over all the vowels. I just need to go down over that one, right? So I would just start, you just put them into groups based off of the trajectory and path of learning. I'm going to go ahead and skip to, just because we're almost done here, being cautious about how we talk about our students when reading. Sometimes I hear folks say, this child is a struggling reader, right? Really encouraging us to think about how can we change that into a more strengths-based and a more precise way of discussing what that person needs, right? So if I say instead, this student is needing support with recognizing long vowel E patterns. That child is not a struggling reader. They're struggling with a part of the progression of reading. If we label children wholly as not able to, entirely as not able to read, we are already, creating a relationship where we're seeing them through a deficit lens rather than an asset-based lens. And they see themselves Yeah, and I think that that's like the part of the metacognition too, right? Is that when we know how to articulate the precise language, you can go back to that child and say, you're a great reader. You can do CVC words. You can do all these other things and read. You know all your alphabet. What I'm noticing we're working on today is just, your long vowel patterns. We're going to get those right together. It gives them a target to work towards. Much like any time we've set up a goal, right? If we were to go to the doctor and just say, they were to label us as, well, you're sick. Okay, well, what do I do? What's the next step? What do you notice? Why am I sick? Right? And not to make that, I perhaps shouldn't make that analogy together, but really thinking about when we go and are trying to be more precise about our language and what people need, it moves us more into already finding a solution. The solution is already in the precise language that we've used, right? Our students are not struggling readers. They're just having a challenging time and need more practice with one part of that progression. And our assessments are going to get us there. And so I think the other piece I did want to mention is just a reminder, we're really shifting away from memorizing sight words, high frequency words, Fry's sight words. I can't remember what other lists. I think I had lists and lists of sight words that I used to use. And really, it's just from the brain research. The brain does not memorize whole words, right? Parts of high frequency words are actually decodable. For example, the word said. This is still s. This is still d. This is what we have to memorize. So now I think what we're really encouraging folks to think about is telling students English sometimes is a little bit weird and is a little bit hard, and there are little parts you're going to have to memorize. Can I tell you why that happened? Not really. Maybe some folks who are like linguists might be able to say why, but we do have some words in the English language that you just have to memorize the part, not the whole word, because you can actually decode those two. Right? And so when you're doing sight words, you're helping your students unpack what are the parts they're going to have to learn by heart. Right? So encouraging no more big lists. And so with that, everybody, we did a lot together today. Thank you so much. If you have questions for our virtual team, things that I can send you resources for later, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll give a little bit of time for questions. As our 5 minutes are up here, and then if you can also fill out the survey, it helps me grow too as an educator and see what folks really needed and wanted to take away from today. So with that, thank you everybody so much, and I'll stick around just for questions after.